All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is our 15th episode of the Belated Box Office, presented to you by Forced to Be Social. Tonight, we're discussing a brand new genre of movies that we haven't touched so far in the podcast, and we're really excited to bring it to you. So, Pat, why don't you tell everyone what we watched this week?
So this week we watched a classic Chinese kung fu film. It was the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. So it's from the what I consider to be the golden age of kung fu films. It was released in 1978 by Shaw Brothers Studios, and it was directed by Lau Kar-leung, starring Gordon Liu and Lo Lei, and written by Ai Kwong. And yeah, new genre for us, and I think kind of like the perfect movie to kind of kind of break that seal, I suppose. The perfect movie to do as our first kung fu film is this one, I think, because it's like really an iconic film for a lot of people. It's kind of the baseline for what all other kung fu films are compared to, like all other martial arts films.
Absolutely. So this movie not only set the bar for every other kung fu movie, but it actually inspired Quentin Tarantino's fairly well received Kill Bill series, which was
And a couple of the Wu-Tang Clan albums, most likely.
absolutely this was the probably the biggest inspiring movie to RZA, who was the we'll call him the godfather of the Wu Tang in terms of the creation and the focus of the debut album that the Wu Tang put out, Enter the 36 Chambers.
Yeah.
Great album myself. I really enjoyed it growing up. In the 90s and early 2000s, hip hop was a big genre of music to get into, and the Wu Tang did not shy away from appreciating iconic films like the one we did this week. All around, it was fantastic. I'm glad they set the bar with this, not only for movies and for aspiring artists, but it was just so well done and so well received that it deserves all the praise it gets. I'm gonna give it
Yeah.
that right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you want to get into kung fu films, like this is a must see. This is really the gold standard.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. I think one of my favorite aspects of this movie was the realism and the historical accuracy that they put into it. One of the notes I made was that I was curious about the main character, Sandi. Sante, as it's pronounced or spelt. He was a real person. So the person in this movie, the guy that it's centralized and focused on, he's a real person.
Yeah.
He grew up in the 18th century during a tumultuous time in Chinese history, and that's reflected very well.
Was it the 18th century,
I believe it was the
or
18th
was it
century.
the
I might have that a little bit wrong. So 1700s, 18th century. As we know, 18th century means the 1700s. As we're
I
living
thought
in.
it was the century before, but
Well,
I should preface this with
yeah,
like the fact that I glossed over a few Wikipedia articles just to kind of get like context here, but that's about as deep as I went.
yeah.
Again,
So
this podcast is not particularly well researched at the best of times. So,
yeah, fair enough, Pat. So we're here to have fun and talk about the movies we enjoy watching or did not enjoy watching, but essentially we're here to talk about movies that we haven't seen before, and so this one definitely I think hit a mark for both of us. I had never seen this movie before, heard of any of its sequels or anything like that. So for me, this was a brand new take on what could be considered the iconic kung fu movie, the godfather of kung fu movies that sparked an entire genre based behind it.
yeah, or at least like really legitimized it
Yeah.
for
Oh,
international at least. Well, I mean, this is a little bit after like Bruce Lee's heyday, I think, isn't it?
I think so, but I mean, I think the way this movie was done was a little bit different in terms of the way it set things off and really portrayed the development that goes in behind these kung fu movies. You know what I mean? Like behind the actors and behind the actual art itself. I find
Yeah.
a lot of the kung fu movies I'd seen before, they typically tend to lean towards, I'm a master, I'm going to go fight people. As where this movie was like, I'm a nobody, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to do my shit, and I'll become a master. And
This movie was just a big training montage.
it was.
This is
It
like
was.
if you took like the 15 minutes of the middle of the Karate Kid and stretch it into an entire movie, pretty much.
It's funny you went with the Karate Kid, which is a great example because they do reference how the Karate Kid was kind of, there was, this was also a preface to the way they made movies like the Karate Kid. I would have more or less attributed it to being like, imagine you put all the Rocky movies into one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the way the montages were done were so well, but they weren't, they weren't put into like a, here's 10 minutes of this person becoming an excellent fighter, and there they
No,
are.
it's more like here's like how long was it? Like the runtime of like him in the Shaolin Temple training. It must have been
So I think the movie ran
like
around
an hour.
an hour and 36, something like that.
No,
It
the
was
movie is basically like an hour 50, like pretty much close to a solid 2 hours.
okay. So you're looking at about 2 hours, right? So there was probably maybe 7, 8 montages in there that really hit kind of all the main points they were trying to get across in terms of what it takes to become a Shaolin warrior, a Shaolin monk, a Buddhist monk with the great ability to defend yourself beyond what would seem capable in a typical normal human realm. I think I actually made a note on. Let me just pull it up here. I think for this film, and I'm going to try to quote it word for word here, because I had a few drinks earlier tonight. One of the greatest aspects of this film is the growth of the character. So we're talking about Sandi, who is the main character, and you see him go from a student all the way to a Shaolin monk who is revered for
Yeah.
his perseverance and his dedication to the art. And I think one of the greatest things this movie portrayed and why I didn't get bored of the montages, I typically hate montages. I'm not a huge fan of this, like, we're going to train this awesome fighter. Here's 5 minutes of him learning how to fight, and he's going to be the best in the world. Just when we thought, the main character was thinking, oh, he's got it. He's good. He's going to be a master. They kind of step it back and humble you with him having to learn a new task and not realize that he's not the greatest fighter yet, and so he's got to learn. They mentioned in the movie the first time they mentioned it was like, oh, your first 24 months you've learned so much, you're so dedicated, this is fantastic. And the next
Yeah.
time they commend him was 6 years later. So you've got like 45 to 50 minutes of montages and training in this Shaolin temple, and they absolutely
It boils
knocked
down
it.
to like 6 years.
Yeah, and they knocked it out of the park, in my opinion, because like it wasn't like, oh, you've been training for 4 days, we're gonna montage that, now you're the greatest Shaolin monk ever. They always
Okay,
had
so you
continue, yeah.
just wanted to jump in. So you like compared to like stuff like the Karate Kid, where you don't like training montages as much. You like this because it gave a better idea of like the scope of his training, about like what really is
Yeah,
involved, and
it
as
was
opposed to kind of downplaying it, where it's like a the 80s pop song just plays over him like training
we're the
for
best
a few short
around.
clips,
Nothing's ever gonna
and
bring
then
me down. Yeah, no,
yeah,
and that was the thing, right? So
and then he
like,
wins the All Valley.
so there was the scene where he was jumping on the baskets to learn his balance to hop over so he can get to the mess hall. So as simple as something as going to get your food, there was like a montage of him learning how to balance better, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like a montage of not just a montage of him becoming a kung fu master. It's like a montage of him learning this one skill to get to level 2 on
Yes.
his like 6 year quest to become a kung fu
Yes.
master.
And I think the most important part to recognize in that is that this movie is called the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. You know what I mean? Like, there are
Yeah,
36 chambers, so he has to learn. Well, actually, there's initially
there are
30,
35.
35, right? So
Yeah,
let's get that settled first. So there's 35 chambers, and basically you have to master them all to become, what you consider an outstanding Shaolin monk.
yeah,
So it was really humbling to see that when he makes these big overcoming moments of, I understand this is what it is,
Hmm.
that he gets humbled again almost after every montage they do. They're like, yeah, you're not done yet though.
Yeah.
You're still
So like
learning.
you just mastered one aspect, so here's the next, and now you're a beginner again.
Exactly, and I thought that was one of the most intriguing parts of the film for me was how well they continued these montages, but kept you, you know, in tune with the movie because they're like, that's not it. You're close, you know, you're getting there, but you're not there yet. So it was really cool, and it was really humbling to see. And I thought the most impressive
Yeah, this
example of
movie's
that.
just like a series of Sunday getting humbled at different
Exactly,
stages of their
exactly.
like continuously.
Okay, so I think maybe we should kind of run through the plot of the film.
Be- Before we do, maybe I think maybe because this is like our first foray
Yes.
into kung fu. What was it like for you like growing up with kung fu movies? Like did you get into them and like to what extent? Like
I'm gonna
what was
tell
the
you.
first kung fu movie you remember getting into?
I'm gonna tell you right now. One of them was a movie that I can't remember the name of. I feel like it was like something Dragon with Jackie Chan. It was like a boys' weekend. It was me and my brothers with my dad, and we rented this movie. And it was a Jackie Chan film, and all I really remember was Jackie Chan fucking around at the end during the credits, right? So like all the spoof scenes or the blooper scenes.
Hmm.
That was my first real introduction into like a kung fu movie. I couldn't
Oh
even
yeah,
tell you the name.
and those Jackie Chan movies from like his heyday that we all watched as kids, like the best part of them was the bloopers at the end.
Right?
And they
Especially when you're
showed him
doing all your
messing
own
up stunts
stunts.
and laughing. And
Yeah.
Rush Hour was a good one with like Chris Tucker making fun of his English and stuff.
Yeah, or
Like
like when
Jackie Chan
Jackie Chan
always
tries to
had.
jump through the money bars in the first scene of Rush Hour and he fucks himself up and he's like, "Oh shit!" and everyone's kind of laughing. He's like, "No, give me a minute. Give me a minute.
Yeah.
I'm actually struggling here." But I'll tell you right now, my first impression, the first movie I really recall as laughing at and enjoying in terms of kung fu was Kung Pao, Enter the Fist. That total fucking like green screen movie where that guy entered himself into all this shit and his tongue had a face. It was
That movie was like weirdly toned, like it flip-flopped between
so
being
many different films though as
like
well.
yeah, being like a oh wait, am I thinking of the right one? Kung Pao.
It was like the
Um,
big comedy, right? Like you had like the
oh
I
yeah,
feel like the
that's the one where he took it's like Steve Odenkirk, right?
I think
He
so
he
and
um he basically inserts himself into the
yeah.
into the movie
And they have that like I
in like
swear
an
to God
existing kung
it's
fu
I
movie. Okay.
swear to God it's like the Chihuahua voice from the Taco Bell commercials doing the narrating.
Yeah, and
Uh
he's like
yeah.
I think his character's name is Chosen One.
Mhm.
Like first name Chosen. I for a second I was like thinking you were talking about Kung Fu Hustle,
No,
and
no,
I was thinking, well, that was a bit later.
this was very much a spoof on all the. It was like not another
I
teen
mean, Kung
movie
Fu
for kung
Hustle
fu.
is too. Kung Fu Hustle is also a really spoofy one.
See,
It's like a literal cartoon sometimes, but it does flip flop to being like legitimate. Like it's got a legitimate like a lot of non-comedic beats,
yeah.
and the Kung Fu's actually awesome.
See, no.
But
Here's
then
the
once in a
thing,
while, it's just like here's like a Looney Tunes set piece with these Kung Fu
right? Like
guys.
Animaniacs kind of kung fu, and I would agree. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this movie now, so you know, I haven't told anyone yet. I actually watched the wrong movie the first time. I watched
You did.
the third movie in this trilogy, thinking that was it. It was like late at night. I was like, I'm gonna throw it on. It's on Netflix. Let's just do this. And it was the Disciples of the 36 Chambers, which was the third movie
The third one, yeah.
in the trilogy that this director made. It was fucking terrible. I
Hmm.
think I messaged you the next day and I was like, man, we're not gonna be able to talk about this positively at all. And I think one of the things that stuck with me, not just with that movie, but with a lot of the kung fu movies I've seen, Kill Bill included, and like all these really renowned kung fu movies that I've seen, I fucking hate the over dramatization. I hate the wire work. I hate the fucking crazy. I'm gonna jump 30 feet in the air, do a backflip off a wall, and kill an entire army. I hate that shit. I don't like that. excuse my language, but I mean, it bothered me. So when I turned this movie on for the first time, the real movie that we're covering tonight,
The right movie.
the right
Yeah.
movie, yes. When it was like the opening scene and he's doing all his fucking kung fu with his sword, his pole arm weapon, and he's got like the crazy stuff, and he's got the braces on his arm, he's got the chain links. I was really worried. I was like, oh god, this is gonna be one of those over the top, let's do 14 flips and then attack our enemy kind of movies. And I was totally proven wrong, man. I think I went into this movie, I think, with the perfect attitude that I wasn't gonna like it and that it was gonna be overdone. But they nailed
And
it.
then do you think that's because of your low expectations made you like it more? Because I find that a lot.
I think so, and I think that's one of the reasons that I think I've expressed on the podcast before that, like, if I go into a movie with high expectations, I'm usually disappointed, and if I go into a movie with low expectations, I'm usually pleasantly surprised. Now,
It's tough. It's tough. It's a tough way to live because I'm the same way, and it's like anytime you want to like a movie, like the fact that you want to like it is going to mean that you don't.
And it's ironic. I know, especially between
it's
you and
no
I.
way to live.
Between you and I remember you were trying to push me onto the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and trying to get me to enjoy that show. And I was so hesitant. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can do another sitcom. Like, I've been let down before with new stuff. And it's one of my favorite sitcoms ever made now.
Yeah, it's great.
I think I went into... I think one of the things that helped me was, like, going into it after years of being like, okay, I'll give it a shot. I have no expectations now. But for this movie, imagine having your opinions flipped on their head.
Well, probably because you were if you're coming from like seeing the sequel, which is so bad.
I didn't even see the sequel.
This
I saw
movie
the
would be a
third
breath
one.
of fresh air.
So imagine how bad
yeah.
the sequel is, and then you see the third one, and like you have no reference point of how bad it could have gotten. So
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I think we'll get to the sequels here in a little ending segment.
All right, so let's go through a little bit of the plot here. Really,
let's do.
So, if you want, do you want to give a little bit of the plot, and I'll fill in some historical information afterwards to kind of bridge the gaps.
You're just gonna come in and be like, no, actually, that's wrong. Actually,
no,
this and
God,
that.
no, Pat, no.
History degree. It's right here behind my paintball medals.
I've shrouded my history degree with paintball medals because I just feel like one is more important than the other. I won't say which one.
Or is it because you're just way better at one than the other?
No, I'm embarrassed by my history degree.
Okay. Like, look at this certificate I got for wasting money.
Look at this huge, expensive piece of paper. Yeah, it means so much. No. All right, so why don't you run us through a quick plot of the movie, if you will, a glance over.
So this movie takes place in a village that's being occupied by the Manchu government from the Qing dynasty. And the reason I thought it was 17th century as opposed to 18th is because of the Manchu dynasty being I found them to be most active during that century when I scanned Wikipedia. But
can we just clarify?
Scanning Wikipedia.
Can we clarify century?
Could be totally wrong.
When you say century, I just want to know what you mean, right?
17th century, so the 1600s.
Okay, so you're aware of yes. Okay,
I didn't get my history degree, but I wasn't totally asleep.
No, and I just wanted to make sure
how centuries work.
And for the viewers watching, so like we live in the 21st century, even though we're living in the 2000s.
We live in a simulation. We live in a computer simulation.
We live in a computer simulation that represents the 21st century.
Right. Yes.
So we're not in 2100,
21st century
but we're in the 2000s, and that's considered the 21st century. So if, for example, World War II and World War I took place in the 20th century, the 1900s. So a century is always 100 years behind.
Thank God you're here. Thank God you're here with that.
I want to clarify, because that was actually
where
one of the
would
things,
we be?
Where
would I be without you?
No, I'm going to tell you right now. That was one of those things that, like, when I learned it in history, I was like, whoa, back the fuck up. You mean to tell me the 21st century is actually the century we're living in? And they were like, yeah, the 2000s. I was like, oh my God, I thought it was the 2100s. I thought we were learning about future stuff. And so that's why I hide my history degree, because I'm embarrassed for my own intellect, really, is what it comes down to. But just to clarify for people listening.
a self-awareness at least.
Yes. So sorry, Pat. Sorry to interrupt and try to clarify a point that I'm sure 99% of people understand. Uh,
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. So regardless of what it is, so the Manchus are occupying this town, and vastly considered not welcome. They're being led by General Tian Ta, who we get to see early in the movie. There gets in a big fight against this Han assassin, who he disposes of.
Mm-hmm.
And the there's a group of students at the Chongwen College who are led by their teacher to kind of join a rebellion against General Tenta,
Yeah.
um, in which includes the main character Sante, who's at that point he's going by Lu Yite,
Yeah.
which was the main character changing
Which
his name
which was
halfway through the
actually
movie.
historically accurate as well.
Now, question for you: is this guy? I know that he was like he's a known figure in history, but like how real he was is like something I wasn't able to find. Is he more of like is he actually like a historic figure legitimately, or is he kind of like one of those figures like I guess like Robin Hood,
Do you mean is he like
where he's kind of like
historically
is he
celebrated?
like sort? Well, I guess my question is like is he like a folklore figure? Like is he
I
or
think I
do we know
think
more about him, or is he one of those guys that's kind of like mythologized and like his actual history is kind of muddled?
yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and that's a very good question to ask. I think one of the things that I couldn't really find out was whether or not he was actually more of a representation of the Chinese government that is current, that promoted him as a person in terms of the film and the cinematography. Um, he
Was he?
was
Oh,
he
okay.
was a
So,
real person, for sure.
mhm.
He was well represented in the Shaolin Temple and in Kung Fu, from what I understand. Um, I think more or less his historic prestige and the way they portrayed him was really embraced by the Chinese government. He would probably be a historical figure to celebrate in terms of Chinese history, based on the dynasties that came in fruition throughout history. When you look at the Hans versus the Manchus and all this kind of different celebrations of dynasties, really.
Mhm.
So for me
Right
it's really hard to proclaim, like I'm not an expert in Chinese dynasties or in that in Asian history at all, but he was definitely a real figure, and I would assume based on the time frame that this movie was made that he is a
Yeah,
celebrated Chinese historical figure.
yeah. If it's like the 18th century, that's a little late in the game to be like heavily mythologized.
Well, I mean, like he would, I guess in that sense he would be like a.
Just like is
I'm
he
gonna
more
be
of like a
careful here, just based on how.
folklore
Yeah.
legend, I guess? Like is
I
the
don't
stuff
think
we
he's a.
know about him like legend kind of legends that are like said to be true, or that is it like more do we know kind of the facts versus the fiction of him as a historical figure?
That again, that's a really good question. I couldn't say for sure. I just want to say that he was a real person. He existed. I'm sure that it played a historical part in the terms of becoming the new Chinese Communist Party type deal, right? Like the new dynasty that came to reign and brought in this new uh, Chinese political party. Um, it was interesting in the sense that like when you look at this movie, they're always downplaying this whole Manchurian kind of take on the Hans, which were more like a peasant class in
Yeah.
the Chinese culture. It occurred, I think, at least in the first and the third movie. There was a really big anti-Manchurian kind of sentiment that you could really sense in the movie.
Yeah.
So let me just read a couple things here. I wrote some things down just so I wouldn't try to get them too wrong. Historically, the Manchurians were actually the oppressed people, but they came
Oh.
up and formed 8 banners to overthrow the Ming Dynasty. So the Manchus actually overthrew the Ming Dynasty, which was a massive and long reigning dynasty in China. But there was a transition period of the Shun Dynasty, which was basically an old Ming Dynasty general forced, he basically came to the people, the masses, and said, we can't live like this anymore. And so they created a new dynasty, and then the King dynasty, or the I don't know the pronunciation, but
Qing.
Qing. So yeah.
I believe that'd be Qing.
So the Qing dynasty ended up taking over. Now the Qing dynasty, actually, interesting fact was that they were like almost 75% Han. Like their tribes made up not so much. They were basically an ethnic minority, or a cultural minority in China. But they brought all these people together against the Ming dynasty and obviously the Shun dynasty. And the Hans, who in this movie they were constantly looking down upon, they were like 75% of the bannermen. Now, the interesting historical fact here is that the ones that joined the 8 flags to rally around and all that kind of stuff, they were culturalized in the Manchurian way. So they kind of basically taught them their way of life. But anyone who wasn't with them, they just treated like shit. Mm-hmm. So they were like, okay, these are all the Huns that are not part of our revolution, and they're all subhuman, essentially, right? So when you look down on a culture of people, it really actually helps explain the whole dynamic of the plot of this movie, of like being shit on by a government who doesn't care about you, even though you're kind of like, we're the people, you just don't get it yet. So I thought there was an interesting dynamic in that, in terms of the dynasties and in terms of the people that were fighting for these dynasties, just to be kind of shit on by the people that took over, the Qings. And then you got most of the people that were fighting for them were the same people they were looking down on, but because they weren't fighting for them, they looked down on them even further. So to culturalize a group of people,
the Manchus were kind of like outsiders in China for a long time.
They were, and they still are, and they always have been, right? So they were very,
kind of, because they're called Tartars at certain points in the movie. They'll either call them Manchus, or sometimes they call them Tartars, which I guess is like, that's kind of like the way the Greeks would use the term barbarian to refer to like different types of outsiders. Like they'd also use it to refer to like Turks or Arabs or like Mongols and other people.
Anyone who's not part of them,
from outside,
really, right?
Yeah. And so like Manchus are kind of lumped into them. That's kind of interesting that they were kind of like an oppressed outsiders who kind of became colonizers in a way.
They did, and so they
kind
did
of a different
that.
dynamic.
And this was what I thought was the most interesting part. So like the Hans that they always shit on, they actually relied on them to create their dynasty, as well as the Mongolians, right? So what they did is they had what must have been perceived as they had superior culture and intellect and style, that all these people decided to follow them and stuff like that. So I thought it was a really historically, it was really interesting to kind of look into the background of the dynasties and understand what was going on, because it was very clear in this movie that there was turmoil between the ruling class and the people who had no power.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely, because there's like a really well armed army in the first act of this movie, occupying this small town of like commoners. Like Liu Yite is working for his dad in a seafood restaurant or a
So his dad was a fisherman,
market, right?
And he sold fish, and so like he was a layman, what you'd call, right? Like just a typical Yaoman, right? Just didn't he was just living his life trying to survive and support his family, which is basically the premise for the creation of this hero, which again is one of those things where when we're talking about like the Chinese government really promoting kind of films like this, really works out well and speaks to the people. And it was, it might have been not only a cinematic marvel and masterpiece, but maybe a political one as well for places like China.
Kind of more like as much propaganda as it was cinema.
Yeah, I think we could argue that to a point.
Well, it's a good piece of cinema for whatever else it is.
Okay, can I just go ahead and say this right now? I fucking love this movie. This movie was fantastic. Really, the only problems I had with this movie was like that over the top kung fu stuff that I'm normally used to seeing. But you know what I thought was over the top? Was just the weird scenes where they like focus on the lights and the beams that reflect, and it was like that ching.
Oh yeah,
ching.
The what is it? The eye chamber. I don't know what
Exactly.
number it was.
So the only part of this movie that really took me for a loop in terms of like, that's a little over the top. I didn't really appreciate that. You didn't need to have that. Was when they zoomed in on the eyes in terms of like, you need to be focused to be a Shaolin monk and to do kung fu. You have to be aware, use your senses of vision more than, and
Yeah,
it's very important.
they did a good job of using that to communicate to you how he used his training when he later leaves the Shaolin Temple. But we'll
You know
get to
what,
that.
and
That's
I
getting
think
a
that,
little
yeah,
ahead of things.
yeah, and I think that's a good point to make as well. So basically, this story is about a peasant who grows up going to school, trying to learn, and his teacher in the school that he's at is a rebel to the
Yeah,
Manchurians, the Manchus. And his teacher is basically part of a revolution that is trying to overthrow this dynasty. And they
yeah, and
slowly
recruits
become,
his students.
yeah. So I mean, in a nutshell, he's basically indoctrinating students to believe what he believes, which is,
Pretty
there's a whole
much.
lot that could be said about that.
But
But
I
at the
mean,
same time,
when
if
there's
we
an
just
occupying army there, you got to do what you got to do, right?
absolutely, and I think that the movie makes a good point of that as well, right? So he's talking, there's that one student who stands up and says, "Oh, did you go to the executions? They were fantastic." And he's like, "It depends on who's being executed." Blah blah blah. So they give you this whole spiel, kind of understanding like, this is where we're living, this is where it is, and it's exciting for certain people, but not for others.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's kind of like we'll get into later is like Louis Tay or Sante takes his earlier lessons into account when even after he's gone through the training at the Shaolin Temple and kind of is able to take because the Shaolin are shown in this movie as being very detached.
yeah, which was their
They're
role
not getting
in
involved. They're
society.
not getting involved in like any of the conflict between the Hans and the Manchus. They're deep into Buddhism and just kind of like being above all that stuff.
Yeah,
And Sante's just really not for it. Once he learns kung fu, he kind of makes it clear like I'm trying to use this to like empower the oppressed people,
yeah. Well, you get
which they're
that. You
not
get
fans
that.
of.
Yeah, and you get that kind of sense throughout the whole movie, right? Is that like his goal is not to necessarily be just a monk for himself, but for the people that he lost to get him there, but also for the reasons of fighting back. So there's
Mhm.
all these people that are untrained who don't want to live under this rule, but they just don't have the means to defend themselves, right? So his whole persona takes on this really interesting conflict of character, I would say, as you become a Shaolin monk to protect the
Yeah,
people and to help out outside of the temple, which really isn't seen, but they really highlight that in a scene in the movie where it's like he's very ambitious, but I don't know if he's one of us. And he's like, yeah, times are tumultuous outside of the temple, and we might need somebody like this, right?
yeah,
So the movie does a really good job of explaining all this, right? And that I think that was one of the predetermined factors in terms of like how much I enjoyed this movie as I watched it. Was like, this movie's got depth. It's got great screenplay. It's a great screenplay. It's well written. It's very well thought out, and it's not. There's no wish wash. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's
It's a
very to
classic
the point.
example of the hero's journey, like the
Yeah,
story we've seen 1,000 times. People talk about the hero's journey and how it's parallel. This is a great example of that.
right. And so like
Just with some
from the start of the
awesome kung fu
movie,
thrown in.
just like to kind of glaze over the whole thing. From the start of the movie, this guy is literally just trying to figure out how he can fight his oppressors, the Manchurians, the Manchurian government who looks down on the Han people, and they're tired of it. They don't want to deal with it anymore, and they're sick of it. So you see the way they deal with dissenters, and they're ruthless. So he knows, and he gains that knowledge, and he almost dies in the process of becoming, an outcast and becoming a Shaolin monk. And I think the best part about this movie was the fact they didn't sugarcoat it with the montages that were like, oh, it's been a week and you're the best Shaolin warrior ever. They had so many montages in there to fill in the gaps and to enjoy the process,
They did.
that they really
So
didn't
it's
shit on any of like the actual like what it takes to be somebody as
yeah,
good as that, right? Which is hard to
and he's
do.
definitely like he's not empowered at all at the beginning of the movie. After he gets involved in these, like basically the first mission that his teacher sends him on is
Hmm.
to use his dad's business to smuggle like communication into the city.
Yeah.
Um, and he fails. Like it doesn't go well, and it ends up getting his dad killed, and like everybody at his school gets killed,
Yeah.
and him and one other guy just basically flee town. They're chased by I thought it was a really good villain here is like the guard captain Tang Sun
Oh,
Yao.
yeah. He was great. He was a great character to have because he was kind of that build up to the balance, if you will.
Yeah, he was like the mini boss before the final boss.
Right? I would
He was
totally
a
agree. Yeah.
he was a cool character throughout it. So he chases him on horseback, and that's when um, Louis, I want to keep calling him this until he gets to the temple. Louis Tay um, manages to escape him, but he gets a big gash
Like
on his leg that
just
gets
barely
infected and almost
escapes.
dies.
Just
Yeah,
barely escapes, right? So what that was a really good play on them too, right? Because you're kind of like, well, I don't know what's gonna happen to this guy, and maybe someone
shows
else
up
will avenge
almost
them.
dead. Like he shows up by getting like basically stowing away in a wagon full of food going up the Shaolin Temple, and he shows up like almost dead. These
Oh
monks
yeah,
heal him, and then
yeah.
he tells them he's come to learn kung fu, and they don't want to accept him at first because he's not a Buddhist. He's an outsider.
Well,
Uh,
he thinks he you know, and I think this was the greatest part of the character growth they really developed in the film. What they did was they were kind of like, well, we don't want you, and he's like, well, I really want to learn. Like, well, why don't you go to the 35th temple? Why don't you go to the most dedicated Shaolin monks? And
or
they're
the
kind of
first, like the top chamber, right?
yeah, the top
Because the
chamber, right?
35th is the bottom one.
Is that okay? So my
But he's the
mistake.
one who insists. He's the one who insists at first. Like he basically stays there, and he's like a janitor for a year.
Yeah, but he goes to
Um,
this first temple and you know the first chamber, and these
and there are a
guys are
bunch of
basically like,
Yodas.
do you know how to fucking recite this stuff? And he's like, no. And they're like, and he uses fucking like Dragon Ball
He's like,
Z
no, man.
force to push him down. And I was like,
Yeah, he
damn.
uses a force push. Like he's like they're like all a bunch of Yodas. It's just like 20 Yodas sitting around
Yeah, yeah, they're basically
reciting scripture
Jedi's.
and stuff. The sutras,
You're right.
reciting the sutra.
And that was, I think, one of the greatest parts in showing a character's development is that they weren't sugarcoating it. They weren't gonna braze over these kind of
Yeah,
ideas.
like you want to just go straight to the top chamber? Like fuck you. These guys have been doing kung fu for like 40, 50 years.
These guys are so old they don't want to do kung fu anymore.
Yeah,
You know,
basically.
they're literally just living as Buddhist priests and living in the temple and they're training people. They're teaching people what they've learned.
They're like so good at kung fu, they're just fucking over it.
Yeah. So I thought that was like honestly, and that was what kept me going was the character growth throughout the whole movie. At first, when the first montage came, I'm like, oh, okay, he's rolling on buckets trying to learn how to get lunch or whatever, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Just to learn to eat. Like he's like it's like if you don't walk across these logs, sit like rolling in the water like a lumberjack, then
Hmm.
you just fucking go hungry, man.
And it was good because like they had a goal set in mind from the beginning of this movie. So the idea was to destroy the general that was basically holding the population hostage in his town, who murdered his family, his friends, his colleagues, his fellow students and stuff like that. So with the growth, you kind of understood where the movie was going, but the growth, the montages were done so well that it just blew my
Yeah,
mind, and like
and
I
you
said, like
lose. It takes so long, you kind of lose that beginning plot in it, which I think is intentional because he kind of like he's got to immerse himself in the lifestyle of the Shaolin Temple in order to really get to where he has to be to even begin to think about liberating his town.
oh, absolutely. And that was, I think that was the best part. Just when you think he's got it, they always humble you with the fact that he can't solve the next problem or that he
Yeah,
makes a mistake in his training. And it
it's
was
really
really
just all back to square one.
yeah,
Like in
and
the first few temples, or the first few chambers to get through, are literally just like training you're not even learning techniques or how to fight. You're just like putting your body through the rigors. There's one
yeah.
that works on your arm strength and your wrist strength and
I think the
the
water.
head strength one.
Yeah, that
The
okay, so the
where you're
head
just like
strength one was the
smashing your head
funniest.
into these bags.
Bags, so they were hitting sandbags with their head, right? So that I think that was the funniest one.
Smack,
Uh
smack.
The,
smack, and he's just getting dizzy, and he's like, is that all you got? And keeps smacking his head into these bags.
and then the guys that try to duck out and they get hit with the spear, with the staff and stuff like that. That was
That's
good.
like
I
a
think
lot of things I found funny about these like I guess we'll call them conditioning chambers. The first few
I think so.
is
Yeah.
number one is like that like just giving yourself a concussion every fucking day for however long it takes you. Like most people, I don't think are leaving the head chamber the same as when they came in. They're going to be pretty punch drunk.
I would call
Like
I would call them conditioned. I think.
like a late in their career like NFL linebacker. Like you've taken a lot of hits. Your brain's been rattled around a lot.
I think.
And
I
you're
think what
just
we
kind of
know
punch
about
drunk for the rest of
yeah,
your days.
what we know about concussions now, and I think I saw a documentary about the Shaolin monks. I think they do their head training differently now. Essentially,
One
that
would
was
hope.
meant to build up your skull, like the strength of
Yeah.
your skull. So
Just
now
make
what
your
they
skull
do.
one giant fucking callus.
So now what they do is they do little chops on your head, and
Hmm.
it causes micro fractures. They say so when you actually fracture bones. To a degree, they grow back stronger because they grow back with excess calcium and stuff like that, or whatever the natural bone reproducing whatever. I'm not a scientist.
They could have just drank milk, is what I'm getting from
So
the-
they could have drank milk, but I mean at the same time, like so they do these practicings with their hands to make their hands like steel. So they basically kill the nerves but build calluses and fracture these bones to rebuild strength so that they don't feel as much, right? So like a big thing about fighting is like if you feel pain, you're gonna feel hesitant. So their training is basically to like remove all elements of concern, but at the same time they're a very peaceful people, right? So they're basically only built for self-defense, and we see that in the movie where it's like you're not allowed to kill, you're a monk. And the one guy hops in and he's like, "I'm allowed to kill," and he slashes
I'll
that
do
dude
it.
like fucking
And
40 times.
Stabs him a bunch of times.
And it was gruesome, but you kind of get where they're coming from. And I think the greatest part of this movie was the character growth. I don't think you can get past the whole movie was basically a montage when you look at it, right? So you had the opening scene, the introduction of the character, like this guy's about to die.
I gotta clarify because you said montage enough. Like a montage, by definition, is like a bunch of clips that have to be set to music.
Okay, so
So it's not like they're playing a soundtrack like over top of like the whole movie.
sorry,
So
yes. So there are
I
a
know,
bunch
I know
of
someone
multiple
out there is just like,
sequences.
why the fuck? Why does he keep saying montage? That's
Yeah.
not what a montage is.
Well, I was listening to the Eye of the Tiger the entire time, like on repeat.
oh, well, then for you it was a montage.
For me, it was
I
a
stand
montage.
corrected.
No, but I mean, like, so for me, it was like a series of rapid character development in the arts that he had to learn. So I'll try to get away from the word montage, but they really did a good job of basically portraying this character learning all the arts without making it seem like it took too long. But then they'd also hit you with the reality of being like, so the first time they mentioned they're like, in the first 24 months, you've accomplished a lot more than we expected you to. And then later on in the movie, after he does all his kung fu training, they're like, you've become a fantastic monk within 6 years. And you kind of think about it, you're like, holy fuck, 6 years is a long time. But then when I was kind of watching
But that's
the
like
movie
way,
again,
way quicker than it takes anyone else. Like he advances. They keep saying, "Oh, he's advancing more than we've seen anybody."
absolutely. But I mean, like, so here's the thing. It's like 6 years sounds like a long time. And I was like, damn, he did that really quick. And then at the same time, like 6 years really isn't that long. So it's good that they kind of gave it a break. They weren't like, you've been a monk for 13 weeks and you're already the best. So they really didn't try to oversell that, like, this is the best ever, and, like, he didn't have to do any training. He was just born with it. But at the same time, I really appreciated
That's
the
where
fact
I'm thinking,
that,
like, how much of this is like made up by the movie, like how much is made
you
up
mean,
by
like,
the filmmakers,
how much
or,
reality is there to the character that everyone believes Santi is?
or
in
is
terms
it
of the person?
is it like something that people believe in
Could he have
like
been the
Chinese
worst?
culture because he more of like a folklore figure than a historical figure?
Could he have
And
been the worst monk in history, and he just branched out and he's like, I'll teach you kung fu, and then it caused something? Maybe.
Then nobody
all
knew
we
the
know.
difference because he's the only one teaching them.
We don't know. There's
Like,
I don't
well,
know.
no other Shaolin monk has taught me kung fu, so this guy must be the best.
Which would make sense at the same time
Who knows?
too. I mean, we're not here to discredit or credit anyone with anything, but I think one of the things for me that I kind of came to think about in the movie was to me interesting was so many people gave up their lives for Sandi to become this Shaolin monk without knowing he was going to become a great Shaolin monk. But throughout the movie, you see his uncle, his family, his friends, always sticking up for him. Obviously, he's the main character, but they sacrifice their lives for him. So I really appreciated the fact they weren't just like, oh, within 6 months he became the best. It was like so many people, with so many years
It's within
experience
6 years
life,
he became good.
right?
He's not even the best. He's just really good.
Exactly. So all these people sacrificed their lives. They gave up, 20, 30 years of their lives more for him. And so I really kind of developed this understanding that, like, he wasn't just doing it for himself when he was at the temple, but kind of understanding that he had to do this for the people that he was fighting for. It's kind of a revolutionary idea. You know what I mean? Like, all these people sacrificed for me to survive, so I must become the greatest, or I must become, here's my determination based on the sacrifices that I received from family and friends. I thought that was a really interesting aspect
Yeah.
to think about in the movie for
I like
myself.
how that. Yeah, I like how that plays out. That kind of brings us to the end of things. So after he kind of like ascends to a really high rank, and they want to offer him control of one of the 35 chambers.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got to beat one of the the disciplinary teachers. He's basically says if you can beat me, we'll give you whichever one of the 35 chambers you want. It's yours,
Yeah.
and you'll
And
run
that
it.
and that same
And
character was kind of like he's really ambitious, and so like throughout
yeah,
the movie, like he wasn't just a no-name character being like I could take him.
and
He
it
was
takes him
kind
a
of like
lot of tries to beat him. Like he gets his ass whooped
I think it was like
12 or 13 times.
16 or 17. I think it was 16
Yeah, a
times.
lot.
Right? And then he develops
Before
his
the
own
only way
weapon.
he's able to beat him is invents a new weapon. The
Yeah,
three
the three
section staff.
the three section nunchucks.
Yeah.
Right? So like, and that's a real thing. Like this idea
Yeah.
of having a multiple
Did
connected
Sante actually
staff
invent that in
weapon.
real life, do you think?
To tell you the truth, I didn't look that far into the history. I wouldn't be surprised. You know what I did after I watched this movie is I watched the Shaolin monk versus the Warriors Deadliest Warrior.
You
Just
did?
yeah, I 100% did. I can send it to you later.
Oh no, yeah,
Do you
who was
remember
it? The Shaolin. I remember
Shaolins
that one,
versus
yeah.
the Maori, the New Zealand
Oh yeah, the
and
Maori, those guys,
Australian
yeah.
classic native tribes that were vicious warriors, and they did really well in every war they fought in after, even after the Commonwealth took over. But it was really interesting to see the kind of weapons they developed, and one of the things that struck me was they had
That
this like,
was such a good show.
oh, it was man that
That was
show.
such a great, like, stupid turn your
It
brain
was
off
such
show.
a
You could watch and be
it was
like,
a bro
I'm
show.
learning history.
No, it was a bro show. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like you sit down
for
with your
sure.
boys and you have a couple beers and you're like, man, I'm gonna, who you got money on? Who you got? Who you got? I
Yeah,
got this
or
warrior.
you just put it on and it's just on in the background.
Right? Like it was
You're hanging
good to
out there, you're
watch
just
on
like, oh wait,
yourself.
they're gonna cut this up with a sword. Oh man, that was a great show.
Oh man, I have recently acquired all 3 seasons and I'm very excited to watch all of them.
There's 3 seasons
There
of
are.
Deadliest
There are.
Warrior.
Unfortunately, the third season gets a little out of hand, and they finish off with a vampire versus zombies thing. I think we mentioned that.
Their final episode.
It's terrible. Don't
That's
watch the
sad.
fantasy. What I loved really was the demonstration of weapons and the skill and the understanding and all that kind of stuff. But like, so when I watched the Shaolin monk, there was like a weapon where it was like a 6 linked chain whip, basically, right? They used it as like a defense, basically creating a whirlwind around them. Anyone
Right.
stupid enough to come into that whirlwind was going to get hit. So they had like 5-6 feet of like stay the fuck back, Yahoo kind of shit. And it really reminded me of the 3-piece nunchuck, which was a huge part in this movie. It played an absolute huge part in this movie. It was
It's
really
the only way that he can ascend to the rank where they're going to entrust him with one of the 35 chambers.
not only that, but I think it demonstrates that he was the ideal character and candidate for the new ascension.
Like
right?
the innovation, right? Like the
Right,
fact
he
that
created
not
his
only
own.
does
Yeah,
he created a brand new weapon, a brand new style of weapon fighting in order to overcome the challenge, beat this guy who otherwise was just kicking his ass up and down the temple
because
for
there was,
weeks,
and that was
months probably.
and that was the greatest thing about the montages. I never felt like they dragged. Even the
No,
montage where he
no.
kept fighting the guy. So
On
like he's like,
paper,
oh,
this
this
movie
is
should
the
seem boring.
16th
It's
time.
like there's a couple fights in the beginning, then you watch the guy train for a fucking hour,
Yeah,
and then there's a couple fights at the end. Like on paper, you think like, well, that sounds like it would be excruciating. That doesn't sound like an entertaining movie at all. But it
it's
really
yeah,
works. Like they did it really well because you're really invested in like, wow, like this is what it takes. Like this is what this guy has to go through to get to where he wants to be. That's awesome.
right. And so like when I think about it, I'm like, what would this script look like? It's like page, whatever. Okay, so page 14 when he finally gets to the Shaolin Temple. Well, he
Mm,
has to hop over a bundle of sticks and a piece of water. And then it's like
yeah.
16 pages of blankness. Like, well, what happens there? Like, well, he tries to
Oh, yeah.
hop over this
He's trying
bundle of
all
fucking
over the
sticks.
sticks, and like it just keeps not working for a while.
Yeah.
You just stick with him there, and he doesn't get to eat, so he's really hungry. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like a cool kung fu movie, but it's
So
fucking
they're like
cool. Like,
flipping from
I
page
really like watching him
14 to
try to jump over
36.
those sticks.
14 to 36 page. The bundle of sticks breaks. Now he must figure out how to hop over one or two sticks. And okay, page
Yeah,
113. He hopped over the sticks. And you're like, Jesus Christ,
well,
man. Like there's
it's
no
not that bad.
dialogue here. No, I know,
It's
I
just
know.
him hopping
I'm
over
exaggerating.
sticks.
But they really did a good job of like
Yeah,
portraying like it's not easy. And I hate when movies do
no,
that when they're like a montage where like you see them throw the first punch and it's like, oh, that's terrible. And the next scene they're just like 13 punches. Like I could fucking destroy
just like
Muhammad
those are
Ali.
amazing. 13, but
And it sucks because I feel like I'm referencing Rocky here. Like I'm not really shitting on Rocky or any of these movies, but like the montage scenes, or sorry, not the
I mean,
montage, the
Rocky
sequences of
4 and up, you can shit on,
I could
and
totally
that's
shit on.
fine.
Absolutely, Adrian ain't shit. Uh, but but the way they did these sequences of training, it didn't feel as dull as it should have,
No, it didn't.
and I
I
think
don't
that
even
was
fully
really good.
understand what it was, but like, yeah, it
It
was
kept me in
really
it, man. It kept me
it,
every and
it-
and just when you think like, oh, okay, this isn't very an exciting scene, like especially when he had the two logs by his head that were smoking, and they're like,
yeah.
follow the clock, don't move your head, follow
Were
the
you do?
clock.
Here's a question: were you doing it along with him?
I was kind
I
of.
was because I 100% was. I'm like, I'm gonna
It's
sit here and
it's
see how hard it
easier
is
for
for
me
me
because
not to
my
move
my
my head.
my TV is so far
It's
away,
just
and like
going
when
on
he
the
moved really
TV.
far, I was like, well, I can see everything on my
Yeah,
TV.
that's only
I don't have
14
to move.
inches.
Hey Pat, can we take a quick break here? Again, I was at the bars. I gotta just take a quick bathroom break if you
Oh
don't mind
boy,
here. So we're gonna take
what a
a.
disaster this episode is.
It's already a disaster. You know what? Things reopened up. Life is tough. We'll be back in about 30 seconds here, folks. So just stay tuned.
See ya.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back after our short hiatus there. A bathroom break caused by me after drinking way too much beer tonight. As we enter in towards the final acts of the movie, as we've discussed so much of the great displays of cinematography they've done with the development of the character, we kind of roll ourselves into the final of this movie, which is basically what the character has seeked the entire time, which is revenge for his people and his family and his friends on the Manchurian government who have been treating his village like shit.
Not even so much revenge, but just empowerment for the people who are being oppressed.
That's a
Which is a
much better way to
good
put it.
aspect of
Yeah,
the character. Like it's not like he's like mad, like I gotta kill the guy who killed my father or anything like that. Like it's never really you never really feel like his motivations are focused on that. But after he's been promoted again and given license to pick any of the 35 chambers. They say whichever chamber you want, it's yours, and you'll run it, and you'll be like the lead instructor there.
yeah,
He says, "Well, I want to create a 36th chamber, and want the Shaolin monks to share their knowledge of kung fu with the general population to empower them to fight for their people and for the land, to empower them to fight against the Manchu oppressors."
yeah. So
Of course, the Shaolin
yeah,
monks are not down with that. They're not feeling it at all.
yeah. So they're very
And
so. I guess an important point to make would be the Shaolin monks typically have no interest in anything outside of the temple. They basically exist for themselves and seek enlightenment through Buddha. And
yeah,
creating the 36th chamber of the Shaolin temple was to pass it to the laymen to defend themselves against oppressors, which essentially is what Buddhism is all about, right? Like, overcoming the greater evil and shining light on the good. And that's a really good point that you made there, Pat. Is that he wasn't? I guess and I said that hastily. He's not seeking revenge necessarily as much as he's seeking redemption and more or less freedom for the people that he's lost and the people that continue to
yeah.
live under an
He's
unfair
just looking to
and
fight for a
unjustified
cause
rule.
that he believes in, being raised as a Han under
Yeah,
these, which is nothing that any of the other Shaolin monks would really be like experienced in at all, right? They were all raised in the Shaolin Temple, presumably.
yeah,
He was raised like in like the son of a fishmonger, being oppressed, and so he's got a different perspective on things. So we think, so we've got all this, like, these resources to teach kung fu. We should be putting that out in the world to make it a better place. And then they give him like the head abbot there, or whoever it is that's running things, that promotes him. Basically, like, gives him a non-banishment. Like, I didn't fully understand what he was doing, what was going on, but what I got from it is basically he says, I want to find like some promising young people who have skills that can translate into kung fu, and I want to teach them, and I want that to be the 36th chamber. They say, well, no, we're not having that, and this is total blasphemy. So, Sante, you are exiled. So go out into the world, and if you can find some people who want to learn kung fu when you come back, maybe we'll consider it. So it's like, you say you're exiling him, but you're kind of giving him exactly what he wants, really.
it was
Like,
a
they're
it was
kind of
like
giving him a chance
it
to.
was a hidden message in that, right? Kind of like,
Yeah.
and they even mentioned it in the movie. There was a great foreshadow in that where he's like, he's very ambitious. So like, we only understand what's going on in the temple, and he has a perspective outside of the temple, which could be helpful.
Yeah.
They say that
So it
like
was really
midway
just like
through his training, right? Which was
it
really
was just
good.
like a kind of like I think this guy knew what was going on. Like he was like, well, that um I'll put a spin on this so it seems like he's being punished and exiled, but really I'm just giving him a chance to kind of put his money where his mouth is. Okay, like, you want to open a 36 chamber, like, build it and they will come, kind of.
Yeah, and
So he puts him out in the world.
it really struck a chord with me when kind of lost my thought with the dog barking there, but it struck a chord with me when he went out and like that whole sequence of actions before he actually took action on what he wanted to do, like finding the people he wanted to. You kind of see this whole like, I'm just a monk, I just want to teach you guys kind of stuff, and these other guys are like, no, we want to fight, like we want to learn, we want to defend ourselves, we're tired of this oppression. And
Yeah.
and you really see that development of the 36th chamber in terms
I
of
really
what he
do
wanted
like
to do.
yeah, you see it develop before he even goes back to the temple, which is a part of the movie I really like is when he's kind of meeting all these guys, these young Han guys in his old village and kind of recruiting them to his cause. I especially the blacksmith. I really liked how they did that fight, kind of where the blacksmith is like fighting all these Manchu guys and actually like holding his own, right? He's picking up this big old hammer,
Yeah,
like the fucking Megaton hammer from
yeah,
Ocarina of Time,
like
and
playing
just
Ford,
swinging it
right? Yeah,
with all these got at these guys. Sante, he's just watching him go for a bit, and the guy's kind of like taking a beating. So we watch it. What comes in whispers to him. Sante just whispers. So then he picks up this like big old hammer from like
giant sledgehammer
from the
from
head,
his yeah.
yeah, and using it. He's swinging it around the other way. He's a lot faster, and he looks at him like, "Hey, you're right. It is better if you swing it at the hilt." And like then he just kicks all these guys' asses. Sante's just kind of sitting back watching him like, "Well, let's see if this guy's really worth anything." And of course,
Well, I think
dude's a
that,
prime candidate for to be a student of the 36th chamber.
and I think they did a really good job of like portraying all of the lessons that he learned at the Shaolin Temple. That he
They did, yeah.
almost instantly, shadowed it and gave that insight to other people that he was trying to recruit into the 36th chamber. So you know what I mean? So like when you see that scene where he's holding up the stick and they're like, this weighs 120 pounds at the end of a 12-foot long stick. Okay, make it shorter. It weighs less. So as you bring a load closer
The same
to
as he
yourself,
did in like the wrist training chamber.
exactly. So that was more or less a mechanical lever kind of question, right? So it was like there's a certain term for that kind of lever, but I mean it was like the mechanical advantage you gain from getting closer to a load is better, but you get more strength when you learn to manage. And he was clanging the bell, and so that really rang to me when he was like whispered into the guy's ear, and the guy started using the heavier side closer to himself. You're like, well, that makes sense because they've already explained that a load. So like even the scientific aspect of it was like really like holy shit, they really did a good job.
That's why I defend the criticism, or I like defend that scene that you had a criticism of in the I guess we'll call it the eye chamber, when it had that kind of effect of like zooming in on his eyes and had that weird sound effect and like the glint in his eye. It did a good way of it did a good job of communicating kind of the same thing to you later on in the graveyard fight. This is when he's fighting against Tang Sun Yao,
When he
the favorite villain.
Yeah,
And
all the blades. And
there's
the
two
fingers.
guys on either side of him. They've got he's fighting Tang Sun Yao. Two of Tang Sun Yao's guys are flanking him with their throwing knives in hand, and he just kind of looks to the side. He zooms in, does the same effect, and then he ducks at the right time that these guys just hit each other with their throwing knives.
Right, and that was
really
badass. Cool. That was one of the most badass scenes actually. But I think for me, like just in terms of that scene, like it was the noise
like
that kind of was like, of course they'd make like some crazy ass noise when they focused in on the eyes, right? Like it wasn't necessary. You could have zoomed in, but you're right.
Like that,
and when they
like in Kill Bill, whenever it gets red and zooms in on Uma Thurman's eyes, got that like beep boop beep boop.
Yeah, that kind of understanding, and we'll get to that in a second. I don't want to say much right now, but I mean, when they get to those scenes when he's slowly defeating all these characters that he was, what it seems to be destined to overthrow, it really came to a head there when he ended up fighting the general, and it was really good. You know what I mean? Like when he's like, I don't kill, and that one guy's like, I fucking kill, and he slashes him like,
I'm not a monk.
30 times in the chest. He's like, for all the thousands of people you killed, and you're like, God damn, that is intense, man. That is intense.
He goes at him.
Right? And then, but they have that scene at the end where he's fighting the general. And so now we kind of reach, like, we might have glanced over a few scenes. I think one of the scenes was my favorite. Was like,
how do you know three more guys?
How do you know he's a monk? And that one guy keeps questioning him the whole time. Then you like kind of go through every chamber of training that he went through to prove to this guy. He's like, oh,
a lot of them, yeah.
Now you're a monk. After he like does
now I believe you. Then he just jumps in, tries to test him again. This guy's just like not having it. He's like, I'm gonna hit you with something when you're not expecting it.
It was like seven tests. 7 tests of being like, now you're a monk. I believe you. And he's like, okay. And then he tries to walk past these sticks.
Now
like,
I really believe you.
Now you're a monk. Now I really And so like it kind of, for me that was kind of like, okay, that was a good filler scene, not necessary, but also at the same time it kind of shows everyone like obviously he's the real deal. and he's come
Yeah.
back to actually help them, and he's not trying to hinder their development and their cause. And this leads us to the final battle, really, when he fights the general. And holy shit, it was not overdone. It was amazing,
Yeah.
man. It was an amazing feat of cinematography. It was an amazing feat of screenplay. It was just
Man, like they
so
don't make them
good.
like that anymore.
No, and I'm
It's
I'm
just
trying to think like of other movies that I'd seen like that, and almost every other kung fu movie. And honestly, it bothers me. I've seen a lot of kung fu movies, but it bothers me with like the over accentuation of they can
this
do
final
four
scene
flips
had
and then kick
no
somebody and they can run off walls. I'm like, no, no. This
this had
movie,
no gimmicks. Like
there was
this
no
had no
gimmicks.
like no frills on it. It
I
was
think
just
I think
these
the
two guys are
yeah.
real good at martial arts. One of them has a couple swords. The other has a crazy 3-section like nunchuck staff,
Which
and they're just
was
gonna
yeah.
go at it. They're just gonna go at each other and
Which
show
was
off how
how
incredible their
well
martial arts are.
foreshadowed was that when he was fighting the dude 16, 17 times, and
Yeah.
he had the two small short swords with the two small blades, and he
He
kept
used
getting
every
beat,
weapon he had. He's
and
like,
he
let me
couldn't
use this
figure it out.
spear, let me use this sword, let me use these daggers. Like, what am I going to be able to do to fight you?
What?
Like,
Yeah.
nothing works
How
until he has
can
to invent a new weapon that no one's ever conceived. And
right?
then, not only that, like take it for granted. Like, it's easy to take for granted. Like, he not only had to invent this weapon, but he had to like become a master at it.
A
And he
hundred
had to
percent.
teach himself because nobody ever could teach him this weapon because it didn't exist until he fucking made it up 5 minutes ago.
Right. So why not give this guy another Shaolin fucking chamber? Right.
Yeah, give him whatever
Which was
chamber he
like
wants.
it
Like
was so
he's
fantastic, man, and the
he's
way
an
it was done.
innovator.
And so like you see this whole struggle against so like they've done all these series of like he's struggling, he's learning, he's getting better, he's the best. Like in the water scene when he starts helping people, that's when I knew like okay, this guy is going to be the real deal.
Yeah,
And so when you see the final scene and he pulls out the three-piece nunchuck and you're just like obviously he's
it's like,
going to
oh, this general's fucked.
yeah, right. So
Like
that was
game over.
my thought exactly. I was just like, man, of course he's gonna win. Like, so you're fighting two swords, just like you were fighting the guy that you couldn't beat 16, 17 times in a row. I think it really more or less portrayed the idea of training over impulsive uh, violence. Really, I guess if you want
Yeah.
to put it in
Oh yeah,
in a
like he
short term.
worked for everything he had. Like he earned everything he did.
But I think the
Everything he
best
does in
part
this
was
final act, he spent the whole movie earning the right
yeah,
to be able to
yeah.
say that he can do that stuff.
And there was no shortage of like proving himself, which I thought was great because it always humbled me after every time in the movie. Now he didn't he went through all 35 chambers presumably. They
Yeah.
only showed a certain amount, but it was great because they always humbled it. Just when you think he's going to be the best, they always humbled it, right? They're always kind of like, "No, he fucked up."
Right.
And so like
Every time he gets to a new chamber, he has to like earn everything again.
yeah, and
He
so
has to put
there
in the
was
training and he has to show like that he can like overcome this new challenge and he's got to earn it all over again. It's not just like he beats the first couple chambers then he's like, "Oh, I got it. I can fuck up all these chambers now." It's like, no, every time he comes to a new chamber, he's like, "Oh shit.
he's
Here's a
finding new
totally
struggles.
new
There
challenge
was new
and I
character
gotta
struggles.
start
It was a
from square one."
huge arc. And that was the thing when he started doing like the buckets over the water and he hopped over finally and got his lunch and he did that huge like I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other and I'm gonna do this one footed and blah 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 like it was intense and I was like I really hope they don't end his training on the fact that he can jump over sticks.
Yeah.
I was really nervous like because I'd seen the third one accidentally first and I was like I really hope
Oops.
they don't end that shit right there because that's terrible. It's a terrible way to do it. But no, they kept humbling the character. And that was
Yeah.
the best part about them being like after 24 months, like, oh, you've done the best in 24 months. Oh, you've done the
Here is
best
one
after 6
criticism I
years.
do have of this movie is
Yeah,
that final fight, as great as it is, ends so abruptly.
it
It's the
did.
most abrupt ending to an action scene I've ever fucking seen. He wears him down with this 3-section staff and like disarms him of his swords. Then he like headbutts him 2 times, and I think he does one headbutt where he flips him into the air, and it's just like yeah, and like mid air it just cuts like smash cuts to the next scene.
Which,
And
you
then the
know
next
what?
scene's kind of the final scene where he's got like all his buddies that he's like recruited to help him to defeat the general. plus a bunch more guys. They're now in the 36th chamber. He's teaching everybody kung fu. So he's, he did it. Like he did everything. He liberated his village.
Yeah.
He disposed of the general. He went back to the Shaolin Temple and he was given license to open the 36th chamber. And now he's teaching kung fu to the general populace.
That's a very, I think, in my opinion, that's a very valid and warranted criticism of the movie. But I think at the same time, like when you hear about the way he was talking, like when you're reading the translations, he's like, oh, yeah, I'm not here to kill type deal, but I'm here to balance the power of good and evil. And Buddha will defeat all evil. So I think when he did that final scene, it was kind of like,
you can't like kill everybody, and he's like, Buddha, hey man, Buddha's got to dispose of great evil.
Yeah, and so he was like, I can't stand on the sidelines anymore. That's not what Buddha would want, like based on my training. Like my job here is to balance the powers and stuff like that. So I guess I would agree with you 100%. Like it was kind of a strange scene in that sense. But at the same time, it did serve a purpose in terms of like, you don't have to see him defeat the evil, but to understand that he has not only maybe defeated the evil, but he's also gained a following in teaching people how to defeat evil themselves, right? How to
he's always kind of had that. Like he's always been unwilling to stand for that. It's just like going to this temple and living with these insular monks. He got the skills that he needed to he needed to like accomplish his goals. And then he leaves the Shaolin Temple better than he found it by kind of bringing that to them and saying, this is what you're missing because you don't have my perspective. So
he's kind of like the best Airbnb guest you'd ever have, right? Like leave this place in the same condition you found it or better. He's like, I'm gonna leave this place
and just improve your philosophical outlook on things.
Yeah. So he leaves a note, No, but I thought everything about this movie, and like I know it's critically acclaimed and like it's really well done. One of the things I want to bring up is like there's a few things. So the first thing I want to say is this movie was so well done that throughout the world, 32 international distributors picked this film up. I wish I could have found figures on like box office, versus with the production cost. I couldn't, but it was totally a proof of concept. Totally,
that's probably pretty tough if it's like spread out among so many distributors.
It probably was, but I couldn't even find a budget. I feel like they just didn't release that stuff. I don't know if that had to do with like because it was a Chinese-based film, if they just wanted to hide how much it cost so they could like pretend or fudge the numbers. But it
just
was
in case it wasn't a success.
It was very well received, and obviously, if 32 different fucking international companies are trying to buy this to sell it worldwide, it's a very good proof of concept. It was a very good movie. Really hard to argue with that. One of the other interesting facts that I found out was that this movie was released under 5 different names.
Really?
In the U.S., yeah. So I want to give you... I'm going to read them out. I'm going to try
Hold on. 5 different names just in the U.S.?
Just in the U.S.
So, like, if you're watching this movie in California... You're like watching it under a different name than somebody in like Illinois.
I don't know for sure. I know there were different versions that were released at different times, and that's probably where these names came from. But let me clarify, it also includes just North America, so Canada as well, because they didn't really specify. I know when I was searching, they're like, "What was it called in Canada?" And I was like, "I'm not answering this shit. That's not for me." But so in the U.S. or North America, in the North American market, the video box title was Shaolin Master Killer. The short title, 36 Chamber. The other short title, Master Killer. The dubbed version was called The Master Killer. And the final title was called The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, which is the version that we saw.
Like what we watched under, yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like
these were all the same movie, but it was just renamed and dubbed and just redone over, and they just kept fucking reproducing it with different names. I thought that was one of the most... This is the first movie we've done where like a title wasn't really supremely supported.
Wasn't really agreed upon. But I feel like Master Killer is a total misnomer. Like, it totally misses the point.
It does. As we found out, Shaolin Master Killer, I would have given it some credit because it really does explain like he becomes one of the master
he's a
killers.
Shaolin.
But basically, as you see in the movie, even still, he's like, I don't kill, and that one guy's like, I'll kill, and we've mentioned that multiple times. But like, The
Yeah.
Shaolin are not
Pretty
typically
low
a
body count for an action star.
yeah, so they're not typically a violent people looking out for revenge, but more or less a balance, right? A very
Yeah.
Buddhist approach to everything. But I really did appreciate the final title, and again, the reason I say North America is because obviously when I watched this on Netflix, the same title came up, the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. So I would have
Yeah.
just assumed that anything that happened in America was being sent to Canada in that sense, in terms of movie titles. It was well received by critics. So we had critic scores roughly around 70 and viewer scores around 90 on Rotten Tomatoes. IMDb gave it a 7.7 out of 10, so 77%. And I found it kind of hilarious that the other reviews I found were Amazon and eBay. So I could only assume it was based on the reviews of movies that people bought from these websites and
You'd
sources.
think so, yeah.
And they came in at 90 plus. So everyone that bought this movie off eBay or Amazon back before there was like Amazon Video and stuff like that, very well received. Um, it was great, man. It was a great movie. I don't think there's a lot. I wish I could have found out more about the money, in terms of how much it cost. Apparently, from some of the reviews I read, it was like a budget film, but I don't know what budget films mean for China or that day and age and stuff like that. So it was really hard for me to try to get that information, and I just said fudge it. I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, what about your rating then? If we know
Yeah,
how it was
so
received worldwide, what rating are you going to give it out of our 3.5 star system?
that's a fair question. I think based on the lack of overselling the kung fu and the appreciation for the development of the character, I'm gonna give it a 3.2. I
Nice.
enjoyed this movie a lot. It was really well done. Um, Subtitles and all. I didn't watch the dub version. I don't know if you did. Um,
Oh man, we should have brought that up top of the episode. Um,
the dub
but
version was
yeah,
terrible. I'm just gonna say this right now. Like I watched the dub version for the opening scene, and I immediately switched it.
just couldn't do it, eh?
If that's fair enough to add in now. I know it's a little late in the show to
It
bring
is
that
kind
up.
of late. I had a note. I made a note here to bring it up top at the beginning, but I guess we got sidetracked by everything else we had to talk about. But
Fair,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean subs versus dubs. I'm also in favor of subs. Um, as
It,
far as my rating, like I agree with everything you said. This is a great story, and it stays engaging the whole time. The main character, like I said, it's just a classic telling of the hero's journey with amazing action, and the main character like is coming from such a great place, and his development is so like just so pure and
didn't
so
it?
satisfying to watch.
Yeah, didn't it seem
Um,
that way? Right? It was so good.
I also gave it a 3.2.
Fuck, man. I think this is
Exact
this
same
is the
rating.
closest we've come on a movie in terms of our agreement. And I know we like a lot of the same movies, and I'm really happy to
Yeah,
see
most of
that.
them were on the same page. But yeah,
Right?
exact same rating this time, and the same overall assessment. So
I think the only assessment we've ever come so close on was over Avatar, and they were both so negatively
mhm.
reinforced that
Yeah,
it's not
I
really
hate.
fair to say.
I wish I'd give it a lower. I think I gave it like a 1.4, which is ridiculous. I wish I could lower it.
Could you imagine? I give it zero. Now looking back, zero. But
It doesn't deserve zero. It did something. I
yeah,
mean,
okay,
it's great use
a
of
point one.
technology,
I
but it
really
doesn't deserve
enjoyed. Yeah,
1.4. Like I don't know
yeah.
what I was thinking, giving it
I think
1.4.
we
That's
might.
way too
Yeah,
high.
James Cameron got lucky with that. I think it's because we're such big fans of Terminator 2.
Yeah,
But that brings
we
us.
were putting the kid gloves on for him.
Yeah, but that brings us to, and we'll wrap this up real quick here because I know it's getting late. It's been a long running show. The sequels. I'm just gonna go ahead
Oh
and say
boy.
terrible. Just fucking absolutely terrible compared to the first
Yeah.
one. And I'm not just saying this because I don't like sequels a lot. It was fucking brutal. It was like a rehashed story with the shittiest stuff ever possibly imagined. I could
Oh,
not
I think the
appreciate
interesting
them.
thing about that is that I think we've seen different sequels. You say you've seen Disciples.
Sorry. Yes. So I saw number 3, and you had
Yeah.
seen number 2 of the series.
I have
Yeah.
seen number two, but number two was so bad. Like, so I watched this movie a few years ago for the first time. I was just browsing Netflix, wanted something different. Man, what about some classic kung fu films? I haven't watched a good old classic kung fu picture in forever. So I'm scrolling through 36 Chamber Shaolin. Looks good, good ratings. So I throw it on. Obviously, I love it. I give it 3.2 stars. um, not at the time because we didn't have that rating system yet. Um, but I loved it. So I was like, oh man, 36 Chamber Shaolin, that was awesome. And there's two sequels. They're both on Netflix. This is going to be a great time. So I think next weekend, I'm like, all right, let's put on the next one, Return to the 36 Chamber. And I put it on, and it stunk, and I hated it. So I never watched Disciples.
And you're right not to
So
do so, man, because I would assume that number 3 hit just as poorly as number 2. Now, I
yeah,
understand
so
the directors doing what they did. Obviously, such a huge hit franchise. Well, such a huge hit first movie.
is it the same director?
I believe so. It was the Shaw Brothers, I think.
Well, Shaw Brothers is the company that put it out. The
Yeah, but
director was
I believe
Lau
they.
Kar-leung.
I
I
didn't
don't know
look
if he
into the
has an English
director,
name he goes
but
by, but
it was the
you
same.
can
So
Shaw
I
then.
think it was a money grab, and you could almost tell it was a money grab
Okay,
based on
so
the
here's the thing.
success.
I want to give my assessment of like Return to the 36 Chambers. I'll make it quick because we obviously don't have to do a whole other episode right now at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
Based on what I remember, um, it was way more of a comedic style that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's just like the style, like the 1980s Chinese style of comedy just doesn't really translate for me or what it was, but it all fell flat. Um, One thing that was really, really confusing was that Gordon Liu, who played Sante in the first 36 Chambers, um, he's also the star of Return to the 36 Chambers, but he's playing a different character.
Yeah.
Later on, the character Sante shows up, played by a different guy, and he's not in it as much as a much smaller part. Um, but Gordon Liu's character, who is not Sante, for the beginning of the movie is like he's kind of like a scoundrel, like a rascal type character, and he's pretending to be Sante. And it was the
Yeah.
most confusing fucking thing because you got Gordon Liu. I know him as Sante from the first one, and he's like, "Hey, it's me. I'm Sante, the Shaolin monk." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm up to speed. I saw the first one." And then he's being like a clown basically, and I'm like, "Why is Sante's character so different?" And then he fucking sucks at kung fu. Like he's pretending to be good at kung fu to like scare off some Manchus that are like threatening his fucking like clothes dyeing business or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Hey, what's wrong with Sante? Like, what changed since the first movie? He's a fucking idiot now." And then I'm just like slowly realizing, like, I think he's playing a different character until he gets to the Shaolin Temple, and there's Sante played by some different dude that I haven't seen. And I'm like,
Oh
how the
yeah.
fuck? Like, how do you expect me to follow that? Because not only did you set it up for me to be like, well, that's the guy that played Sante, but also he's pretending to be the guy.
It was the,
Like,
you know
what
what,
the
the third one was even worse. I can't even, I don't even know how to describe it, but that was about my same opinion of the third one. It was
is that the
ridiculous.
same thing that happened? Like Gordon Liu's playing a different guy?
No, he played Santi, but he showed up like at a random spot, and like he really had no significance in the story. It was
Oh,
ridiculous.
okay.
So there was like,
Was it
so it
like
was like,
Luke Skywalker showing up at the end of The Force Awakens just to look into the camera and then the
I
movie's
would
over?
I would
Was it
literally
like that?
say he played as much of a pivotal role as Luke Skywalker in that film. Yeah, absolutely. It was useless, man.
What's the
This
point?
kid is a student at a school. Classic opening up. That's how the first movie started. At a school, teachers are teaching everyone. And apparently this guy can't get hit in the third one. Every time he gets hit, he's able to like project the power back onto the people. So everyone hits him
Like
and they hit
Black
themselves
Panther?
back. And it was just
Like the Black
stupid.
Panther suit?
It was dumb. It was so dumb. Like Black Panther was legit because it was like we understand what it was supposed to be, but in the third one they're like,
Well,
nope.
yeah, it's also a comic book movie, so you
Yeah.
expect crazy
Yeah,
stuff like
right. But in this third sequel, it was so bad. This guy's like, yeah, I can't get hurt. Punish me all you want. Ha 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 ha. And you're like,
I'm a-
oh my god, like, oh,
I'm a
your
masochist.
mother
Ha, ha,
trained
ha.
you since you were a child. It's like I don't remember a woman being in the Shaolin Temple, and I don't really understand. Like, it was just dumb. It was dumb. The third
Yeah.
movie was brutal. So and I'm on the
Here's
same
another
page
thing
with
about
the
the
second.
second movie is like just to show you like what kind of style they're going for. Like the tone just didn't work because I was expecting something that had like a very understated kind of slow burning kind of story like the first one, right?
Yeah.
And they're like for a lot of it, they're trying to be like a straight up comedy with like the main character being like kind of a liar and a scoundrel
Yeah, they
who's
did
like
that in the third one too. Yeah.
cheating his way through the story and everything. There's one character who plays one of his buddies in the beginning of the movie. He comes back at the end because it's the same kind of format where he's in town being oppressed by the Manchus, goes to the Shaolin Temple, learns kung fu, comes back and whoops everybody's ass.
Big
It's
surprise.
like there was this is there like convention in like older Chinese theater, I guess, where like a character who's like supposed to be like a buffoon has like buck teeth, like big buck teeth. And
Oh,
there's
like
a
that
guy who's
classic
like
Japanese racist shit they used to do in Disney.
yeah, basically, or like that really racist Bugs Bunny cartoon. But like
Yeah, yeah,
there's like a convention that like the Chinese would do in like old theater where like a buffoonish character is gonna have like big buck teeth like that. And there's a character who's supposed to be like comic relief, like one of his friends in town, and he actually has like fake teeth, like big fake buck teeth in his mouth that you can tell is super fake, and he spends the whole movie like that. It
yeah,
looks fake as fuck. And
yeah.
it's like you know those dollar store like Halloween vampire fangs?
Yep.
It's like that, but like way more egregious.
That's why I wish I could. Excuse me. That's why I wish I could have found the budget for the first movie, just to see like how much did they spend on this, because this was a masterpiece. And then
Versus the sequels.
having seen the third one, I was just like, oh my god, man! Like they couldn't have spent more than $25 on this film. Like it was brutal. It was brutal. But I think that's fair. I think as we've found with most sequels and continuing on of most dynasties of movies to be coy, they don't fare as well. They
Not all
typically
of them.
don't.
I mean, some of them hold up and are even better than the original.
And they do, but this was not the case with the 36 Chambers. It was really
Sometimes
rough.
you got like Sean Patrick Flannery and Norman Reedus, gunning down Italian mobsters, and you're like, hey, that's great.
Yeah,
And then,
but some movies
and then
are
it
timeless.
happens again.
Yeah.
Then it happens again, and they have like a new sidekick, and
They're
they
like,
go
we did
back
the
and
same
kill
scene
more
that
Italian
everyone loved,
mobsters
but
in
we added a
Boston.
grenade. And you're like, you can't just add a grenade to a scene you've done before and make it cool. Like, fuck off. That's just lazy. And I think I didn't see the second, but I saw the third, and it was a very lazy version of the first. And I'm not going to discredit them.
Feel bad that you
because-
didn't pick up on my subtle Boondock Saints reference that I was doing.
I'm
just
sorry.
now.
Yeah, no, Jill came down to get something, but yeah, no, like it's you can't fuck around with Masterpiece, right? As much as I love this
Sometimes
movie,
just leave it alone.
yeah, that's what I
Some
would
movies
argue.
are just good; they don't need a sequel to ruin them.
That's what I would argue with this
And
movie.
that's
It
that.
had a good natural beginning, a great sequence in the middle,
Here's the thing.
and a
Oh,
great
yeah, here's
ending.
the thing too.
Like you didn't have to. You didn't.
Yeah,
have
the
to,
ending was awesome.
You didn't have
And
to do
speaking of
anything.
the ending, like it really does set itself up where like a proper sequel could be in order and could be really good. Like this is like Sante's origin story. So if you wanted to do a whole trilogy like focusing on him and his journey, he just gets the 36th chamber started by the end of this movie. And then he's got a whole bunch of. So I went into the Return to the 36th chamber, and again, like you can tell by the kind of the summaries we've given, it's a very loose trilogy. It's like not continuing the story, but it's like a new story with
Within
different
the story.
characters
Yeah.
in the same world. It's like an offshoot, like a spin-off kind of.
Like imagine The Hobbit was happening the same time Lord of the Rings was happening.
Sort of like that.
You
Yeah,
know what I
it's
mean?
in
Like,
the
it was
same-
just
it's in
kinda
the same
like-
world, the same kind of stuff set up. Like obviously the 36th chamber in the Shaolin Temple is a thing, but that's kind of where the connection ends. But it's like the way that the 36th chamber of the Shaolin ended, I was actually excited to watch Return to the 36th chamber because I was like, now I get to see what happens next. Like Sante's going to be back. He's going to be training all his buddies, like the blacksmith guy and like Miller
Could be
6.
some big
And those
battles
guys-
with the Manchus, right?
The guy with a great like basically like is General Tintah's son gonna come and be like, Sante killed my dad, I'm gonna fuck you up, and then Miller 6 is gonna come in and be like, you gotta get through me first, and there's gonna be a big fight with them.
Which wouldn't be weird because historically the Manchus overthrew some guy for killing his father and his grandfather. Like the history is there. It works out so perfectly to like
Oh
build
man,
these sequences up, and they're just like, nope,
what a missed
we're
opportunity.
gonna make our own sequel, and we're gonna completely fucking kibosh the whole goddamn thing. And it was really
Yeah.
upsetting for that. And hearing you talk about the second one, because again, I didn't see the second one. I just saw the third one accidentally. And
Mhm.
I couldn't believe it, man. I think I messaged you. I think I already said this, but like I was just like, we're not going to be able to fucking talk about this movie. This movie was trash.
I think you kind of like wishful thinking. You were like, I just watched Disciples of the 36 Chamber. Is that the right movie? And I'm like, no, no, man, no, fuck no, fuck
I
that
I
movie.
just
I
googled
didn't even bother
I
with
didn't
it.
even Google 30. I just like went on Netflix. I was like 36 chambers, and it's like Disciples
You
of
would just
36. I was
like
like, yeah, that's the
three
one.
six T, and then you clicked on the first one that
I
came
did.
up.
I did. It was very lazy searching. So I'm gonna give myself fucking 10 lashings for that later on tonight. That's fine. But it was like really disappointing. And so that when I watched the opening scene of this movie and he was like doing all the sword tricks with the rings around his wrist, I was like, oh
Yeah,
fuck. This is gonna be just like the third one.
you thought it was going to be just as bad.
I pray to Buddha that this is not gonna be as bad as the third one, right? And I was just like I was holding my breath. And I was very, very pleasantly surprised when I watched this movie.
Yes.
And I'm not surprised.
Oh,
So
it's
now
a gem, dude.
so now, one thing I want to bring up just before we conclude our podcast for the night. This apparently was one of the inspirations for Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill.
Yeah,
Now,
one of many.
before you say anything, I didn't like Kill Bill. Didn't. I didn't like it.
Okay, fair enough.
It wasn't for me. I'm not saying it was a bad film. It just wasn't.
Just didn't land for
It
you.
just wasn't for me. And I mentioned this to a couple of people online last week, and I didn't realize apparently I was talking to the Quentin Tarantino fan club because one of
Oh
the
no.
women fucking roasted me, just roasted me, and I was like, what the fuck? Turns out she has a Quentin Tarantino tattoo on herself. So she's like
Is
a
it on her
Quentin,
foot?
I don't know, but she has a
Because
face.
if not, then she fucked up.
She has Quentin Tarantino's face on her body somewhere. And I realized very
I
quickly
guarantee you it's on her foot.
I was talking to the wrong crowd. And it was like it was really frustrating because they just like they stuck up for it and they were like, well, it's not even about the movies, but the director. I'm like, well, no,
No, it's
that's
still
the
about
movie.
the movies.
That's the movie.
That's well. Let me put you at ease here, Jeff.
Okay,
'Cause
please,
I'm a
please, because
big,
I'm like anxious. You know, I'm feeling
I'm
fucky
you're,
about
you're
it.
worried about like even admitting that
Well,
to
I
me.
feel
Okay, well,
bad for like not like because I like a lot of his movies, but I just didn't like that one, man. And I think that's
right.
fine. But you know,
Well, I'm a big Tarantino fan, and I also like Kill Bill. I like both of them. But
okay,
out of all of his movies, like if you look at his whole filmography, that's the main one that I understand. If it's not your cup of tea, then I get it. It's very heavy-handed, and it's a genre film much more than any of his other films.
hmm
And so if it's not for you, it's just not for you. So I like Kill Bill, but I definitely don't fault you for disliking Kill Bill. It's not like you said you didn't like Pulp Fiction.
no,
Because
no,
if you said that, we'd have to fight.
no.
But
I
not
did
like a
my,
Kill Bill, like I get it. That's
I did my
totally fair.
research. I did my research because I felt bad when they tore into me. It was only nominated for one fucking thing, or it only won one award. Like it wasn't a critically acclaimed
Pretty
picture.
sure it won like and it's
It
like
won like the best
fight at the
action
MTV
sequence
Movie Award.
film or whatever. Like it was a very obscure award to win.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I
Yeah.
feel better knowing that like I'm not the only one that didn't think this deserved like the best picture. And there was yeah, I can stop screaming. Okay, thanks. But it was
Oh
like
God damn it! He can't stop screaming. This is important.
this is very important shit. But like, so my favorite movie by him is Reservoir Dogs.
Great movie.
It will always be, and it always will be my favorite Quentin Tarantino film. I loved Pulp Fiction. I loved all of his movies. Hateful Eight, I thought was a little slow, but it really came to fruition at the end. I
That
loved it.
one, man, I love Hateful Eight.
I,
That one
I
gets a lot
loved
of
it.
hate.
I'm
That's
just
the
saying,
one,
like it just seemed a little slow at the start. Like I had no problems with it. It was just kind of like one of the, I
Mhm.
watched it on a plane, and I was just like, okay, when's Quentin Tarantino gonna bust out the big guns, right? Because I think his movie before that was either Django or Inglorious Bastards. So you had a bit more
His
like,
movie before Hateful Eight. Yeah, I think it was.
Django.
Unchained.
which was a bit more
Yeah, because the
action
Hateful Eight was
intense.
supposed to be a sequel originally to Django Unchained.
Right, so like it made sense, and I didn't mind it at all. I really enjoyed it, especially when it came to the end. I was like, damn,
Yeah.
there's that sequence that I like from Quentin Tarantino. But the Kill Bills never caught me. I just didn't. I couldn't
For me,
appreciate them.
for me, it's Death Proof. For
Death
me,
Proof.
Death Proof is his one big miss, and
Okay.
I don't get it.
I've never seen that. So again, I'm not like
Yeah,
I'm a fan, but I'm not like a fanboy. You know what I mean? Like when
well,
the
yeah, I mean, like you got to take it. Like it's like those people that say like, well, it's not about the movie, it's about the director. They're fucking wrong.
they are
Like it's
wrong.
about the
It's,
movie. It's
that's got to
about
be.
the final
It's
product that
hundred
comes
percent
out.
wrong. It's
And I like
100% wrong.
Tarantino. I respect him. I like what he does for the most part, but I'm not gonna automatically like a movie just because it's Tarantino.
Yeah, and that's when I knew I was
I
in the
like
wrong
most of it, but
place.
like I just did wasn't feeling Death Proof, and I was like, huh, like
Yeah,
that's a rare miss for him.
and and that's what bothered me is the chick's like, I've got a tattoo of Quentin Tarantino. I'm like, you like everything he does because you have to now. Because if you don't,
Yeah,
you
basically.
have a tattoo of him on your body. It's
You have
like
a tattoo of a guy who made a shitty movie, and you don't want to be that person, so
no, no, you have to
you need
defend
to
it.
like Death Proof too.
She has to like everything. According to her
Yep.
tattoo, she has to like everything. So again, let's not get too far off on the Kill Bill stuff. It was just my opinion when I brought up a kung fu movie. Me and another person were talking about it, and it was wild. But I love this movie. Again, a 3.2. That's one of the higher ratings, if
Absolutely.
not the highest rating we've given on this show, and I really appreciated that movie. I think we can successfully call it a night here on that. I
Well,
mean,
we do have to get to our last segment. Uh, what are we going to watch next week?
it's a good question. And you know what, Pat? I really hadn't put too much thought into it because I was drinking all day. Um,
Fair.
I wonder if I have something written down. It's all the way over there. I'm not going to go look for it. I think it's your turn. Um,
I mean, I picked this one,
Damn it.
so
I picked Wreck-It Ralph. You're
we
right. This is mine.
we play kind of fast and loose with whose turn it is, but
We do. We do.
I
Maybe.
like having this session at the end of the podcast. I want to make this like a staple of what we do is we just debate what we're going to watch next week at the end of each
What's
episode.
worthwhile, what we haven't
And
seen, what we
sometimes we
want to
don't even
see.
decide until later on, but at least we discuss it here.
So it's number 16. We're not looking at a landmark or a milestone kind of episode.
Right.
Man, this is tough. This is tough. We haven't done a horror movie, but I'm not really sure that I really want to cover a horror movie too much.
Yeah, I'm not feeling horror movies so much. I'm not a
Uh,
fan of them personally.
there's not much of a holiday
Maybe
movie
the
coming
odd
up.
one here or there. No, what is it? Yeah, no, there's no.
Yeah, we got
Unless it
like
was
the
like a
4th of July,
Father's Day
Canada
movie or
Day,
something.
Father's Day.
Oh man, should we do like a
Late.
Trailer Park Boys movie or something for Canada Day? Or maybe the Corner Gas movie?
It could be all right. That could not be. I don't know if we go wrong with that, but I think maybe we stick with something that we're more familiar with. Um,
Well, we want to stick with the genre thing.
what
We
if we
did. We
do?
went really genre heavy on this episode doing
We
a kung
did.
fu
We
classic
did.
movie.
Have we done a lot of remakes, rehashes?
Well, let's see. Let me go through our history here. We did no, not Face Off, not Point Break. Um, Terminator 2, Blade Runner, Mad Max. 310 to Yuma is a remake. That's one that we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Avatar was basically a rehash of
Like four different
Pocahontas.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every
Brothers
story.
Grimsby, no. What we do in the shout, no. So yeah, no. Other than 310 to Yuma, we have not really done any proper remakes.
I wonder. Did Colin Farrell do Total Recall, the remake?
I believe he did. Yeah. I've heard that's bad though.
Yeah.
I've never seen the
Yeah.
first Total Recall,
I've seen
which
the
I don't
ending.
know.
I've seen the ending scene of Total Recall with Arnold.
Okay.
It's glorious in all
Is
of
it
its
supposed to
glory.
be? Is it supposed to be good?
I don't know. I don't know.
Like, because I'd be down to do it if it's supposed to be if it's supposedly good. If
Okay,
it's
no.
got
Let's
good
let's
reviews.
do a good movie. You know what we did a really good movie of? I think it was Wreck-It Ralph. Do you want to do
Huh?
another animated film?
Yeah, we could try. We could try that. What'd you have in mind?
I don't know. I really like that movie Soul.
Yeah, Soul's all right.
Yeah, but I don't want to do something we've both seen before. I kind of want to take it
Yeah,
by
that kind of goes
surprise,
against the
right?
grain of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Let's
We've
see.
both seen Braveheart, obviously.
I've not seen Braveheart myself.
You've never seen the movie Braveheart.
No, I think we've discussed this before in the podcast, and you were this surprised.
Damn
We
it.
could do Braveheart next if you want to.
I'm curious because I know you haven't seen Lethal Weapons either.
Tree Frog says Fern Gully. Sorry, we already did Avatar, so
Yeah.
just go
Sorry.
listen to the Avatar episode and
Yeah.
pretend
So
that we're not
no,
making fun of it
sorry.
for being unoriginal, and that's our Fern Gully
Tree,
episode.
we don't want to. We don't want to. We've actually done two movies that you suggested, and thank you for stopping by. We did Princess Bride, and we did our most recent one before tonight was Wreck-It Ralph,
Wreck-It Ralph.
and you absolutely crushed it with the
Wreck-It Ralph episode,
recommendations.
which will be
So
Wreck-It Ralph
I
was
would
great. It was a
honestly
lot
be
of fun.
I'd be
It'll
willing
be
to
coming
leave
out on the
this.
podcast audio this Tuesday.
Yeah, I would be willing to leave it. Okay, so if Tree is willing to put in one more suggestion, we can debate it and figure it out.
Tree's bummed that she missed them. Listen, you can go to listen to the podcast. We've got what is it, Princess Brides episode 9.
Yeah, that's right.
You can
It's on
listen to the audio of
Spotify,
us doing that.
Anchor, YouTube. We got it everywhere, man. We got feelers out everywhere.
It's on Google Podcasts. It's on Pocket Casts. It's a whole bunch of other places.
We're like a gimped octopus. I think we have 5 platforms.
Wreck-It Ralph was last week, episode 14, which will be coming out on the podcast audio feed Tuesday, coming up here in a few days.
I'm almost curious though. I wonder if it would be funny to review Fern Gully just because we could shit on Avatar more.
Well, there is that.
I feel like we did enough. I don't want to drag it through
Fern
the
Gully,
mud,
I'm not
like-
opposed to doing at some point, but maybe let it breathe a little bit since our Avatar episode beforehand.
So I think for 20 we want to do a landmark or a landmark kind of podcast. Was that going to be the Boondock Saints, the Battle of the Saints?
Maybe episode 1, maybe the Boondock Saints will be, or episode 20 will be the first Boondock Saints.
I think that would be great. Now, Tree, I just saw you don't have any great ideas. You've already had 2. I mean, third time's a charm. You might knock it out of the park with this one. This might be a grand slam. I know you've already recommended Fern Gully, but like, just dig deep. What else you got? Just one more, because you've actually been almost leading the charge on what we've been doing in terms of
Yeah, a
viewers'
couple more of these, and you'll have
suggestions.
picked more episodes than we have.
Well, you're
honestly.
gonna have to be a guest eventually. We can't just not have you on the show if you're gonna pick all the movies. I hope that doesn't
Yeah, pretty
intimidate
much.
you. I don't want to put you in a position where you don't want to suggest anything. But you've had great taste.
Labyrinth.
Oh shit!
Ooh.
That's the David Bowie movie.
Yeah.
Where he's
1986
constantly
David
fondling
Bowie
balls.
from the movie Labyrinth.
Where he's fondling the balls. Oh
I
man!
instantly just go to a Flight of the Conchords reference.
Yeah, no.
It's me, Brett, 1986 David Bowie from the movie Labyrinth. Cheesy 80s.
Cheesy
Yeah, you got
80s.
that right.
Yeah, well, you're not far off from what we've been doing lately. Labyrinth would actually be pretty sweet to do. I haven't seen that movie. I watched that movie for the first time in my life when I was first dating my wife. And I think I just watched it because I thought I was going to get laid. So I don't think I was watching the movie. I think that could be a good one. What do you think, Pat?
I've never seen it. So, yeah, no time like the present, I guess.
Fair enough. And now, True, you're saying we were supposed to talk about the pandemic. I'm not following. I'm just, I'm very happy, I guess is a polite term to use. I've been drinking all day. So
Understandable. Alberta just opened up for the first time in like a year.
Fucking did last week. They said you can go to the bars. So me and my brother-in-law and my other friend from my cohort, if you will. Oh, yeah, that's right, Tree. I was thinking that was a whole new episode I was talking about. And yeah, definitely you can come on. my COVID diaries, if you will. A different segment I was thinking about, but yeah, Pat, I think we could do Labyrinth.
I think we could.
I think we could even get the wives involved and just get some of the notes from them. And I know Jill's a big fan.
I don't know whether Kayla's seen it at all.
She might really
I don't
enjoy
think
it.
we've ever discussed Labyrinth.
Yeah, like I said, I'd never seen the movie until I was introduced to it by my wife, so that could be fun. Could be fun. So I'm going to write that down. We should do, unless things change, unless situations change, we should do Labyrinth, because I didn't fully watch it based on what I was trying to get that night. And you've never seen it?
I've never seen it. Jill's coming in saying yes to Labyrinth, so that noose is tightening. I think we got to pull the trigger on Labyrinth.
She came in here? Shit. I was hoping she never came. No.
She's like, he's not listening to me when I tell him to quiet down in person. So
I know, right? Yeah, I know.
I'll just
terrible.
come
in. Yeah, Tree, that's right.
With space on Twitch.
Spilly's on board. It'll be a messy one. But yeah, no, for sure. I think we should do Labyrinth. And I could watch that 4 or 5 times. I could pick the hell out of that movie this week. So, okay, so let's give a big shout out to Tree Frog Rider. She's been more than a supporter. She's been almost the light that has guided. She's like the lighthouse to this podcast, I would almost say.
She is the official Belated Box Office curator. How about that?
Absolutely. You're like, no, I ran into lighthouse references. I don't know enough. I never really grew up around lighthouses, so I don't. But yeah, no, Tree has guided us. She has shown us the light. Yeah. So, Tree, I want to say thank you and so much, and you've inspired already 2 great episodes. So I'm sure that Labyrinth will come across very well. Jill, I will be up shortly after the podcast. Thank you so much for coming in and saying hi and giving us your 2 cents. What do you say, Pat? What do you say? We call it a night? Do you still have any mezcal left, or is that poof gone?
That stuff's long gone.
Poof gone? I found a place that I think sells it out here, so I want to try it. I'm really excited to try a Scotch tequila cross baby.
More or less what it is. Yeah, mezcal's a good time.
Absolutely.
It's delicious.
Right on. All right, well,
let's put a bow on this baby. We're all done. 3.2 stars across the board for the 36th Chamber of the Shaolin. Great film. If you are interested in kung fu movies at all, it is a must see.
Absolutely. This is the Godfather.
Must see. It's the quintessential. It's the Godfather of kung fu movies.
It inspired so much, from the Wu-Tang to Quentin Tarantino. So this one, it's a surefire film. You'll enjoy it. I want to say thank you to Jill for chiming in. I want to say thank you to our production crew, Tree Frog. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. And we will catch you guys all next Friday for our 16th episode of the Belated Box Office, presented by Forced to Be Social. And you guys have yourselves a good night. Cheers.